All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and bore white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, I know we kind of switch things time of the week wise, but we're on Wheel of Time because we're sticking in order and we're going through Forsaken again, this time with Ishii. And I know you've got your play-by-play stuff and your stats from the wiki, and I've got color commentary on Nietzsche. So,
Well, that is um actually where I wanted to start is I was going through the interview database
oh,
on
do
Ishy.
we want to do
Oh,
comments first?
we had a comment, that's right. And um blah 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 blah. I know I replied to it because I wanted to save my thought after um when the thought I had when I read it. I was like, oh, I'm gonna type out my reply so that I'll remember this thought because it just kind of hit me when I read Isomorphic's comment that he kind of uh, I feel like Jordan kind of sort of you could debate dropped the ball, so to speak, or Lanfear's return kind of gets lost for a while until she shows up and she's quasi helping Perrin.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas Moraine's return is very significant, as well as written very well. It's actually very impactful to the story, to the characters, and to the readers. Um, so, Isomorphic's comment from our last real time episode when we were talking about Grendel. I remember Sanderson talking so much about how much thought he gave to Lanfear and the kind of ending he wanted to give her, like she's one of the main characters. But I remember being kind of over Lanfear and her infatuation with Luce Theron. It peaked in book 5, and that was in. Grendel emerged as a much more interesting character.
Hmm.
Um, and my thought at the time after I read that was that that's a great point. I wish I would have thought of it in the moment, but it leads me to another thought which I'm going to ruminate on, do some reading, rereading, then see what I think when we focus on Lanfear. We give Sanderson grief for kind of dropping the ball with Grendel Hesselim, but didn't RJ kind of do the same thing with Lanfear Sindane? She's so integral in the first 5 books, but when she comes back, she gets lost in the background a bit. In contrast, credit where it's due, don't know how much was Jordan, don't know how much was Sanderson, but still, credit where it's due. Moraine's return is masterfully written and impactful both to the reader and within the story. And just kind of thinking back on Lanfear for the moment, uh, really, I feel like the only time we see her doing anything of significance is when she shows up at the cleansing, and it's not that significant. She's mostly running for her life and being angry.
Hmm.
All we really do is we get an insight into her mind and how bitter she has grown because of what happened to her, um, and how much she wants to make Luce Theron pay for that.
Hmm.
Um, which there could have, should have been a more interesting turn there of the jilted lover idea because she is so intent on turning Luce Theron and using him, using Rand in those first 5 books, that when she comes back for her to be the jilted lover and really go dark, you know, could have been more interesting, but we just don't see her very much.
Hmm. Well, and even in a new body, she could have taken on a new form, trying to be a new lover, posed as a Aes Sedai or something that
Mm-hmm.
had gone away, and something to that extent, and try to become the fourth of the three, and then push the other three out. You know, and you could have had that go down. Now, I think it's good we're doing Ishii first, and we started with Grendel because the more I was thinking about this, they have more similar motives, and it's no surprise they were the first two. to go over to the opposite side. And there's going to be some parallels to what we talked about last time with Grendel, with Ishii here. Uh, Most people would say we should have done Ishii first, but we wanted to do more homework on that.
Hmm.
And we've done so many relationship episodes that Grendel seemed to be an easy, a lower hanging fruit, but she actually wasn't. Lanfear is actually the low hanging fruit because she's limbically hijacked the entire time. Now, yeah, she does a lot of smart things in response to it because she's not stupid, but she she's she's the jaded lover, like you said, and she was before even the war for power. In fact, that's what drove her to the war for power. Uh, or drove her in the direction she went for the war for power because she felt betrayed, and the
Hmm.
betrayed lover with a knife is not a good thing. And so she went and got the knife from the Dark One and kept stabbing. But Grendel, she wasn't a betrayed lover. She was somebody whose whole world collapsed.
Well,
And
that's a great segue into this because one of the rabbit holes I went down was Peterson talking about Nietzsche
mhm.
and the collapse of a belief system. And the problem is, the danger is that if your belief system is so challenged that it collapses, then that leads you to a point where you suddenly have no belief in any belief system. You think all belief systems are crap.
Well, and that's why I actually contend what you said at the end of our tease episode for this slightly. You said that Ishii is like the guy who read Nietzsche wrong. And that's very fair to say, comparable to the 1930s Germans, right? They took the things uh, that broke down the system and used it to gain power. But no, I actually think it's different. I think Ishii is Nietzsche
Mm,
because I went down a deep dive of just his life course and how it all played out and how he evolved his thoughts throughout his life. And I mean, reading the little biography of Ishii, yeah, he's the professor that whose world was turned upside down. And when we'll go through Nietzsche's writings as we go here, but yeah, it is more of a parallel to Nietzsche's life. It's as if Nietzsche found immortality, because what people forget is Nietzsche died young.
hmm.
He died very young. There's theories that he may have had a brain tumor, but he may have contracted syphilis at a young age because he was always unhealthy his entire life. And this is where I can sympathize with Nietzsche and know how he can kind of formulate his thoughts over time, because when you always feel like you're dying, that's going to have an effect on your mental
Hmm.
state. It's not fun. It's overcomable, but at the same time, it's going to affect what you believe and what you don't believe, and
Hmm.
how you go about life in general. So that's somewhere I can actually come from personal experience and say, oh, I can see why he went this way, why he went that way, why he did this, why he did that, and he did change his opinions over time, and it parallels Ishii in his development as well.
um yeah, and then you have to add on to that. This was the interesting bit that I found when I was looking through the interview database. Add on to that the danger of knowledge. Just coincidentally, um, when I was going down these YouTube rabbit holes, I took a break to watch some of the other channels I subscribe to, and one of them is a guy channel named Master Samwise. I've talked about him before. He talks a lot about masculinity and archetypes in storytelling, and one of his latest videos was what was the title? Um, Denethor and the Folly of Knowledge. He also talks a little bit about Odin in, I guess, one of the latest God of War games, which I haven't played, so I don't know if you know what that's all about. But anyway, um,
What was that again?
he also uh, uses as an example Odin from the God of War,
Hmm.
because they're both similar in that they are both held hostage by um, knowledge of doom, essentially.
Hmm.
Because remember, what makes Denethor Denethor by the time you see him in Return of the King, is he has been gazing through the Palantir to acquire knowledge. Except the Dark One, if you will, is controlling what he sees. So, for instance, he is fatalistic. Denethor is fatalistic because he already knows when Gandalf shows up to tell him that the armies of Mordor are marching um, on Gondor. He already knows.
Mm-hmm.
What he doesn't know, because the Dark One, if you will, is manipulating what he sees, is he doesn't see that Rohan is writing to his aid.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doomed. But why flee? Better to burn and get it over with now. Paraphrasing what Denethor says. So there's the folly too of knowledge versus wisdom, and that is something that Rand says when he's kind of in a loose Theron moment when they have some of their back and forths is, did your thinking, look what your thinking has led you to, look what your knowledge has led you to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the tidbit that adds to that is I had not noticed this, although suspected it. It's not 100%, but it's basically confirmed that because Jordan had said that there was at least a Forsaken, or I think he may have said a male and a female Forsaken that isn't just a dream walker, but is a dreamer, and that is almost certainly Elon Moradin.
Mm-hmm.
So add
Because
on
he
top
wasn't
of
he wasn't showing up in the flesh. He was just being there. But no,
well, no,
but that could also be Lanfear because remember Lanfear called that her domain.
no, it's probably both of them, but I think
Oh.
that is an added element that not only does he have the knowledge from being partially, or periodically aware and active while they were sealed away, but then you add to that what he learns or thinks he learns, viewing into the Palantir, but you're only seeing part of the truth, not the whole truth. That what is his prophetic dreams showing him, and how is he interpreting
Well,
those?
let me add another element to this. I was going to save this for later in the episode as kind of a wild card, but you put it right in my face again. Is there was something, and I could not go through 14,000 pages of text to find it, but there was something where somebody mentioned, and I wonder, I think it might have been Lanfear mentioning that he played with the portal stones when he was during the Age of Legends. Someone said something about knowing things about the portal stones, but Ishii would know more because he actually studied these things. And when we get the point of view from Rand going through the portal stones, what did he see in every life he went through, thousands and thousands, and it said countless lives? Him losing.
Mm-hmm.
What if
Mm-hmm.
Ishii saw him losing if he played with the portal stones? What if he saw alternate futures that was just extension of his misery? Because remember, Ishii wants to die for good.
Mm-hmm.
He, this book, the big book, actually, I think made a mistake in here. They uh, they talk about one of the things that messed him up was his lack of his feeling of I'm not immortal. I'm trapped in the seals. Now I'm out of the seals and I'm not immortal. But what we get in the text of the series, and I think most people would agree with this, is he wants to not be immortal. He wants a final death. He wants the world to end.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean the universe, everything, well, he wants to unweave the pattern, right? He doesn't want to make a world of his own like Demandred does. Or Lanfear does or Grendel does. He doesn't want to make that. He wants nothingness. And what if he played with the portal stones and kept seeing him being miserable over and over and over again, which is one of the parallels to Nietzsche. Nietzsche was miserable his entire life. And you talk about knowledge. A doctor told Nietzsche at one point, quit reading and writing for a while because your brain is messed up. And that was advice he refused to take because he wanted to die instead of lose knowledge and to assimilate knowledge, to make knowledge. He said, no, no. this is more important than life. And that's exactly where Ishi's mind was he wanted everything to end. And what if played with the portal stones as a philosopher and saw that it never would?
The other interesting tidbit from the interview is that um, keep in mind he wasn't always like this. And I hadn't really thought of this because we've gone so far and it's been so long. But the Ishamael we see at the very beginning of the series is not the same one we see when we see him again as Balsamon and don't know yet that that is Ishamael.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this back and forth that Sanderson had um uh on Twitter, and he said, "Man, I love the prologue of The Eye of the World. Some of my favorite writing in the entire series. Great insight into Ishamael's personality pre-madness. People like to talk of Rand's character development. Alon Ishamael Moradin is almost as interesting to me. His outlook has evolved so much." Someone said, "Has it really evolved? He's still the megalomaniacal favorite top dog he's always seen himself to be." Sanderson, "No, he's really changed a lot. He's a fatalist now, as I mentioned to Dragonmount. He knows far more." And then someone replied, "How would you compare Ishamael's motivations from when he was Elon versus when he was Moradin?" Sanderson, "Alon is actually more selfish. He still thinks he will rule, that the Dark One will take over the world and create a new one. Moradin has been through madness and touched the mind of the Dark One. He is far more fatalistic and actually less selfish."
See, I
To
always
your
got the
point about him
reverse
being Nietzsche,
impression because Ishama was so fleshed out, and I think Morden was kind of a basic bitch. So that was one of my disconnects with how it kind of
mm,
progressed with him. It was he seemed to be just, okay, I'm top dog, everybody do what I say, and this thing is going to happen at the end of the book. That's what Morden kind of felt like after maybe Crown of Swords or so. And Ishii was so deep, which, I mean, you go in the prologue of the first book, you started deep. You didn't start surface level.
mhm. Well, I flip back open to the prologue, and he's definitely different as still Alon here. Um, let's see. So on the new edition here, it's page 34. So it's right at the beginning of the prologue. He shows up and declares, "Lord of the Morning," he said, "I have come for you." And Lews Theron's crazy, and the black clad man's eyes widened, darted to the body of the golden haired woman, then back to Lews Theron. "Shaitan take you. Does the taint already have you so far in its grip? Um, you mustn't say that name. It's dangerous. So you remember that much at least. Remember, you light blinded fool, I will not let it in with you swaddled in unawareness. Remember." So there's to Sanderson's point about the selfishness, the arrogance of, I've come here to gloat because you lost, and by golly, you're going to remember so I can have my moment of satisfaction. That's what he cares about. And when Lews Theron says, "Who are you? What do you want?" the clad man drew himself up arrogantly. "Once I was called Elon Morin Tedronai, but now," and so he's very prideful of, "This is who I am.
Mhm.
This is what I have done." And and it is very different from when he is Balsamon. And um who is it that when we get the hint, or basically the admission that, yeah, that was Ishamael, I think it's Demandred who mentions in passing that um by the end he might have actually grown to think he was the Dark One, because
Mhm.
the Trollocs thought that Balsamon was the Dark One, that this was the Dark One in the flesh, or a projection of the Dark One. and and there's someone mentions in passing that, yeah, and Ishamael may have been so far gone by the end there when Rand destroyed that body, that he might have thought he was the Dark One. Um,
Which the
and
humbling moment. So the cheat book talks about him coming in and out of reality
mhm,
after the sealing of the war. And one of the times he comes into reality is to talk to Lews Therin. Then he comes back for the Trolloc Wars, and he comes back for Arthur Hawkwing's to convince Arthur Hawkwing to fight the Aes Sedai. And one of the moments in that is he decided Hawkwing was a threat to him as well. So he tried to take him out, and Hawkwing was victorious. And so that was the Trolloc Wars. That's what made Hawkwing, and that might have been the humbling moment, was he was beat by a man.
mm,
And so no, he completely changed his strategy. That's when he started the Black Ajah. That's when he put whispers in ears to get half of Hawkwing's army to go to another land, which he apparently, according to other people, was very involved in how they did things, uh, and in the long run convinced Hawkwing to siege the White Tower. So that might have been the humbling moment when he started the Trolloc Wars and humanity won because of Arthur Hawkwing.
well, no,
Uh,
the those were 1,000 years apart. The Trolloc Wars were 1,000 years after the breaking. Hawkwind was 2,000 years, but I'd forgotten that someone mentions in passing that the Trollocs came out in force
yes, you're right. You're right. You're right. Yeah.
early in Hawkwing, and he destroyed them,
Hmm.
and then they were quiet for a long time after that. I had forgotten that part of it, that was one of the things that solidified his reputation as well as his control and his power.
Well, little did he know, though, in that first of invasion, the Trolloc Wars, he created Eridhall, Shadow Logoth. And so that actually became a big player as well.
Hmm.
So he might have been humbled over the course of 3,000 years because of these defeats and had to reassess in his 1,000 years of incubating again.
Well, humbled, and then also back to the Nietzsche comparison, staring into the mouth of madness, quite literally. I mean, that comment by Sanders about having touched the mind of the Dark One, he was the closest by far, both in physical proximity, but also in ideology, to the Dark One. And so he stared into the abyss, and I wonder, this is one of those, darn it, I wish we could ask him these questions as we ponder these things. I wonder if that was purposeful on Jordan's part, because something I didn't know until I went down this interview database is it didn't occur to me that the the physical effects on Ishamael that turned him into Baalzamon are from the true power.
Mm,
So that's what the saw eventually does to your eyes, is it destroys them and turns them into caverns of fire. But that's what other people see. You still see normally,
hmm.
according to Jordan. So, and the way he describes the looking into the eyes and looking into the mouth of fire is like an endless cavern. It is an abyss of fire. And so I wonder, was that a purposeful kind of homage or inspiration to Nietzsche's idea of staring into the abyss? And now you have become the abyss almost literally. Look at what you have done to your eyes and your mouth. Look at what you have done to your face.
Hmm.
So I would love to be able to ask him about that connection. And I didn't in any of the interviews I saw. I never saw anyone ask or reference Nietzsche, which is
Well,
a bit of a shame.
yeah, it is a shame because it's so obvious. Let's go ahead and let's just go through parallels. So, and I'll go kind of semi in order here. Where is it? I'm looking in the cheat book. Okay, so he was too erudite for wide popularity, were extremely influential in many other ways beyond philosophy, most especially the arts. So one of Nietzsche early in his life befriended because of his opinions on philosophy and the arts and religion. He was a great friend of Wagner. and he lived with him while he was composing all his pieces of, based on German history. And so he was a basically a steward of Wagner because of his philosophy on how art, how music of the day was breaking off into two branches. One was basically pop music, and one was meaningful. And Wagner wasn't a true believer. He wanted to make meaningful music that had history behind it, that had feeling and everything, and the rest was just pop. It was,
Mhm.
as you've been reading Master and his Emissary, it was left brain thinking, just going with the beat. What we see today with pop music, it's four chords and a beat. That's all it is. And that was kind of what got him going and what got his career started. And then he was the first to right before he converted to the shadow, he came out and uh okay, so he made a public announcement of his pledge. So coming from a world respected figure at the time when famine, plagues, and massive riots were racking a world that had never known them, in the middle of a conference called to discuss dealing with these problems, and he sparked ever greater riots. So he came out in this big meeting to discuss what the hell is going on since the bore is open, because all of a sudden humans are humaning. And
Pandora's box, yeah.
yeah, and that very reflective of Nietzsche's breakout work, which was The Birth of Tragedy.
Hmm.
And in The Birth of Tragedy, he basically compared Apollo to Dionysus, and how order and chaos. It's Peterson, 300 years before Peterson wrote 12
Mhm.
Rules for Life, right? It's it was order and Apollo, the god of the sun, versus chaos, Dionysus, the god of drunkenness, but also things like vengeance and basically emotion. And so you had reason versus emotion. And he wrote that book and everybody went crazy, but that is what propelled Nietzsche to fame. So he started with the arts, but then he came out and started talking of the balance of life, which in a time in a world where everybody was like, oh, and this is where Grendel comes into it too. Oh, the creator is the only supernatural thing that exists, and we must live this way and do these things. And all of a sudden, this hole is bored into the world, and everybody is all of a sudden privy to the fact that there's a balancing force. And that balancing force was being basically repressed for a long time for whatever the bore was holding it back. And humanity had that in them, but for some reason it wasn't. So this is why I think of him as the philosopher and the academic. He was probably studying this from whatever the previous age
Mhm.
was.
Mhm.
He was probably, and going back to Nietzsche, he made his big leaps and bounds when he got extremely into phylogeny. So seeing parallels between what a person's actual life was, Jesus being one of them, and the stories told and the literature that came out of it with uh influences such as Schopenhauer and Strauss. And so he's going through all of this and he's basically becoming, as you would put it, nihilistic, where he's like, wow, all of these things I believed because my dad was a priest, and obviously a Protestant priest, because you can't be a priest and have children if you're a Catholic. But my
At
dad
least
was
you're
a
not supposed
priest.
to.
Yeah. And that's what I was supposed to be, because that's what he was studying in seminary. And all of a sudden he comes across, through his musical connections and then academic connections, to the subject of phylogeny, and he's exposed to a world that isn't what you were told. Now, again, we got a metaphysical version of that with Ishii, where all of a sudden a hole is bored in truth, and this thing was exposed. But yeah, it was. I think those were major moments in his life, and you see those exact same moments in Ishii's life.
Where the divergence is, though, is that, even though he he made some comments that weren't very humble, um, the Nietzsche was actually pretty arrogant about his intellect. But again, if
Oh, he was
it's
hilariously arrogant about
it's not
his intellect.
arrogance if you
He
can
would
back it
write about
up.
how smart he was.
Exactly. That's in one of the Peterson clips I had. Is he references that um but he was humble in the sense that uh how's the best way to phrase this? I think Nietzsche truly understood the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Mm,
And so uh where Elon is the guy who read the wrong parts or didn't read all of or didn't understand, however you want to phrase it, Nietzsche. So he becomes what he has what Thomas Sowell calls the fatal conceit, which is that the reason academics and technocrats are the way they are is a lot of them are bitter because they think I'm smart, I should be in charge. It's the old adage of those who can't do teach.
hmm
And there's truth to that because I've
Well, because
I
a
had
lot of
this
people that do things well don't know why they do them well.
it,
Yeah.
interestingly, a lot of the best baseball managers were mediocre catchers. And I think that's because to be a catcher, you really have to know the game.
Or the best head coaches are third string quarterbacks. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, Kellen Moore, who just won the Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator and is now the head coach of the New Orleans
Yeah.
Saints, is a very young
Kubiak.
guy.
Yeah. Kubiak.
Mhm.
Who else? Sean Payton.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. So you have to learn because you can't do, and therefore you're able to pass on that knowledge. But for those who are fatally conceited, they assume that their portion of truth is the whole truth. They are
hmm
Denethor. That, well, because I'm so smart and I know so much, but then they forget the in this area. Therefore, and I think that's part of Elon's coming out is, hey, I'm a freaking genius. I'm way smarter than all you people. um, to Sanderson's point about how, you know, Alon, who becomes Ishamael, expected to rule, expected to help the Dark One remake the world in his own image and rule over it. And why not? Because I'm a hell of a lot smarter than all you people.
hmm Well, and so not only does he think he's smarter than everybody, so you have the arrogance aspect of it, but he had these revelations. So if I'm that smart guy and this is what I've gotten out of my studies and my knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
then if you don't agree with it, you're stupid. I mean, he wrote Joy of Science, and this goes right with Elon Ishii. In the Joy of Science, he wrote the tragic aspects of human existence. The tragic aspect of human existence will always prevail. And in Thus Spake Zarathustra, since time is infinite, everything in life is reoccurrence of what has happened before and will happen again. So you put those two things together. The tragic parts of humanity will always prevail, and everything keeps happening again. And that is Ishi in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
And if you add the arrogance of, I'm smarter than you, and this is what I think.
Well, that is a great segue into this, which is come on, computer. Hello, computer. All right. Well, you're being dumb. Um, so I guess I'll just read it. I was trying to send it to you so you could play the video. So this is from one of Peterson's lectures on Nietzsche, and I believe this is from Beyond Good and Evil. And he's got a slide up that is the inevitability of nihilism,
Mhm.
which is
Go ahead and just share
something
your
Nietzsche
screen
talks about. Da,
so we
da,
can
da,
at least
da.
see the slide. Should
Uh,
be available.
there we go. All right. Of what is great, one must either be silent or speak with greatness. With greatness, that means cynically and with innocence. What I relate is the history of the next 2 centuries. I describe what is coming, what can no longer come differently, the advent of nihilism. And how much does that sound like what Ishamael taught, especially Ishamael in The Great Hunt, when he's really in Rand's head of and the portal stones. I have one again loose. There it is. I am inevitable. How much does that sound like Ishamael, especially in the guise of Baalzamon, and a little bit with Moradin. But to your point, we don't see that initially. I think that comes later, especially in like the scene when he in is it Gathering Storm? No, no, it's Knife of Dreams. When Rand gets pulled into Moradin's dream,
Mm-hmm.
and Moradin is just sitting there tired. He's just tired, man. I'm just tired. I'm sick. Like Nietzsche, he doesn't feel good because
Mm-hmm.
he's got that connection with Rand, and it's making him physically drained, you know. And so you get a little bit of that sense of the inevitability of nihilism from Morden in that scene.
Which is funny because this is the misunderstanding of Nietzsche is
Yes.
he would talk about the nihilism, but he would also talk about the Ubermensch.
Hmm.
And what he would, and one was just back to his first real breakthrough with Dionysus and Apollo. He was like, the path is like down the middle of that.
Hmm.
And what we get
Well,
with Moradin and Rand in their connection is Rand finally realized that he
mhm,
needed to be something that was everything.
exactly.
And
Well, that's what
and
we're getting to here is
mhm,
so Nietzsche continues, our whole European culture is moving for some time now with a tortured tension that is growing from decade to decade as towards, excuse me, a catastrophe, restlessly, violently headlong, like a river that wants to reach the end, that no longer reflects, that is afraid to reflect. He that speaks here has conversely done nothing so far but to reflect, as a philosopher and solitary by instinct, who has found his advantage in standing aside outside. It's hard not to like hear Ishamael or as Balsamon or Moradin saying this. You can almost hear him saying these exact words in that moment in uh in Knife of Dreams when
mhm.
Rand is pulled into that dream. You could almost hear him Moradin saying this exact thing. Why has the advent of nihilism become necessary? Because the values we have had hitherto thus draw their final consequence, because nihilism represents the ultimate logical conclusion of our great values and ideals, because we must experience nihilism before we can find out what value these values really had. We require at some time new values. Nihilism stands at the door. Whence comes this uncanniest of all guests?
Which these are from Peterson's lectures, which would have
Mm-hmm,
been like 10 years ago.
mm-hmm,
And now you hear him talk about cynicism. We talked about this at one point. That is the first step to wisdom. That parallels that right away, right there. Is nihilism is the first step to figuring out what actually means anything to you. So we see this parallel in Doge right now, and Elon Musk style of cleaning, trimming the fat. Right? He did this with Twitter. He goes to zero and then adds back in. And what Nietzsche is proposing here is you have to get to zero
mm-hmm,
before you know what matters.
mm-hmm.
And he went through some interesting times in academia and relationships. He was a part of a tryst where the two girls started playing against each other, and he was in academia when basically the school of thought changed because of political leanings based on wars. The Prussian Empire and all those things
Mm-hmm.
were very in flux at that time. And he was the man of the hour and then the demon of the hour so many times in that little bit of time he was alive, all the while feeling like shit. And basically feeling like he was going to die any day.
Hmm.
And so you can understand where he would come to the conclusion of, well, we say this with addiction. You have to hit rock bottom before you know what's available to you outside of it. And there's truth to that. You want to, as someone who guides people, you want to keep people from doing that, but it works. It definitely works. We go back in evolutionary biology and psych. If you're not motivated to get up and eat, but now you're starving, you're definitely motivated to get up and eat.
Hmm. So this is, and it's interesting. We talked about Grendel first, uh, because there is an interesting dynamic there of the difference, and it's um, what Peterson talks about in another lecture where he brings up Nietzsche and the idea that if your belief system is so challenged that it is destroyed, you lose all faith in any belief system, which is nihilism essentially.
Mhm.
And and there's
Well,
the second.
specifically, oh yeah, specifically Grendel is when you become nihilistic to ideals, you become hedonistic. Yeah.
And the next part of what Peterson is going to read, I mean, the next section, I believe this is from Beyond Good and Evil. I think is what this where this passage comes from. Um, and then he's going to make some connections to other things too, to how do you keep this from happening?
Now I'm not going to have it right where you wanted it because it's
Uh-huh.
harder to just to skim through hour and a
Thing is
half.
unfair. Nietzsche says, no, no, you're not going to get away with that. First, he says, ours is the most honest and compassionate age, comparing modern civilization, let's say, to everything that has come before it. So, speaking of corruption is not something you can do lightly. And then he says, and this is remarkable, distress, whether psychic, physical, or intellectual, need not at all produce nihilism. That is the radical rejection of value, meaning, and desirability. Such distress always permits a variety of interpretations.
Is that what you wanted?
And then so pause there for a second, yeah, because then he's going to make some connections to Freud that you really
Oh yeah,
like.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but again, it's who was it that you've cited before of it's not if you like Nietzsche, it's what part of Nietzsche
Douglas
you like.
Murray.
Yeah, Douglas Murray.
It's said in the best British voice you can get.
Yes.
Yeah.
But right there within that same passage, Nietzsche is destroying the later people who would come and credit him with things he never said, never intended, never did. Because he says right there, like, this need not become nihilism. You know, this need not destroy everything. But
That's a rough one.
Oh,
people like Alon, Ishamael, and then especially Morden have become so obsessed with the darkness. And again, I wish I could ask Robert Jordan, you know, and I need to go down a James another rabbit hole to see if he ever talks about Nietzsche, is how much influence, if any, did that have? Because I mean, light and dark are um, obvious tropes, but I don't. It doesn't seem like it's an accident that they refer to the shadow, capital S, as an entity, an organization, and that is what Elon became obsessed with, was the darkness.
yeah, he created the Black Ajah. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was specifically made to be that entity.
It's like, well, you had a rough childhood. Well, someone else who had your childhood might not have drawn those conclusions. So here's an example. You know that most people who abuse children were abused by children as
Oh
children,
yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
right? But most people who were abused as children do not grow up to abuse children. And you can figure that out arithmetically, because if it was the case that everyone abused grew up to abuse, in about 4 generations, everyone would be being beat to death in childhood as a matter of course, because it would spread exponentially.
Which would be the conclusion of the nihilist,
Mm-hmm.
the rational
Mm-hmm.
nihilist, right? So if you're Elon in this case, and time is infinite, and you also believe that human will always exist in their tragic form, your final conclusion is we're just gonna be Trollocs, basically.
Mm-hmm. As an aside, I appreciate YouTube giving you the silk sleepwear sale for your birthday. Happy belated birthday.
Oh
My
yes,
my
by the way,
wife
yes. 45 yesterday, you know.
my wife reminded me when I went to refill my coffee is, did you tell Sam happy birthday? No, I completely forgot. What kind of friend are you? The guy kind.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
That's why we have wives, to remind us, tell your best friend happy birthday. Oh
Well,
yeah, it was his birthday yesterday.
us guys, us guys, when we get in our 40s and it's a birthday, every once in a while you get the midlife crisis, but at the same time, you basically it's just another day.
Mhm.
Whereas when you're, especially suburban women, get in their 40s, it's a birthday week or a birthday month or the year of insert name here.
Yep.
And yeah.
Yep. All right.
That isn't what happens. It dampens. And why is that? Well, if you're bullied as a child, we could say, well, you could draw 2 conclusions, causal conclusions. Being bullied.
Oh, speaking of which, I did want to have an episode on bullying soon
Mhm.
because I've been doing a lot of research on personality traits, and that came up as a topic. So let's put a pin in that for a social episode.
Caused me to be a bully. Fair enough, man. That's an understandable story. How about being bullied caused me not ever to be a bully? Well, why is that any less reasonable a conclusion? It's frequently one that people draw, and since the 2 opposite conclusions can be drawn from the same set of experiences, you cannot say that the experiences caused the conclusions. And that's Nietzsche's critique of, say, sociological or psychological determinism with regards to the optimism or pessimism of your world.
That's actually important. With Nietzsche is he actually, contrary to what he just said a little bit, was he was very much in line with what we would call social roles theory.
Mm.
And how society determines how people behave, which he was right. He was 200 years ahead of Baumeister, who's probably the best on that right now. But at the same time, he might have been overly so, which is understandable when you're 200 years ahead of the people who actually know the science.
Worldview. Such distress always permits a variety of interpretations. Right. Rather, it is in one particular interpretation, the Christian moral one, that nihilism is rooted. The end of Christianity, at the hands of its own morality, that was the development of the sense of truth, which cannot be replaced, which turns against the Christian God. The sense of truthfulness, highly developed by Christianity, is nauseated by the falseness and mendaciousness of all Christian interpretations of the world and of history. A remarkable claim. And then this one's even worse. It's absolutely brilliant, I think. Rebound from God is truth to the fanatical faith, all is false. That's nihilism, an act of Buddhism.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to stop that before the advertisement. I don't think that's where you were going with that, but
well, it was in a sense, because as I went down this rabbit hole, I hadn't made this connection before, but when Peterson talks a lot about Nietzsche, he also talks about contemporaries who built on Nietzsche's work, one of whom was in the title there, Dostoevsky.
Mm-hmm.
Because Dostoevsky was a devout Orthodox Christian who was very concerned with what the destruction of the faith in Russia was going to lead to. And much like Nietzsche predicting what this spiraling downward of society was going to lead to, Dostoevsky was very prescient on where Russia would end up because of this crumbling of the church, in this undermining of the church in Russia. And when Peterson talks about the 2 of them, it suddenly hit me. You could make the case that as archetypes, Ishamael is Nietzsche, Rand is Dostoevsky.
Hmm.
That this is Rand is the one who builds on the idea that, well, no, it isn't, it may be inevitable on the path that we're on, but it isn't necessarily the only outcome.
Mm-hmm.
There are other outcomes, there are other possibilities. We can shape our world if we so choose.
Yeah, I need to read more Dostoevsky, maybe this summer when I have a little time off, because apparently The Idiot is only like 100 pages. And what I've heard described about that book is Rand from book, where does he start going off the edge? Book five, maybe? Ran from book five to his enlightenment is Dostoevsky's The Idiot.
Hmm.
And so yeah, we might have to do a whole episode on that. Give me time to read a 100-page book, but I have got a lot of shit to read for school. So we might do that over the summer. But yeah, after The Forsaken, let's just do Rand like all in. And
I mean, there's yeah, that I was already thinking that we needed to make that connection because of that parallel. Sanderson brought up the characterization, the character change over the course of the books of, Rand's is really interesting, but also look at Ishamael, and that's true. And there's a parallel, there's a very obvious and eventually literal connection between the two of them. Um, that we definitely have to go down that rabbit hole as well. And rather than I was thinking we might do it next, but we'll see how far we're able to go down
well,
these
we
rabbit
can
holes and
we
read
can
these things.
probably do like a combo episode for uh uh Agenor and Bethamel and Moghedian probably in the same episode, you know.
Yeah, Agnor Bethamel are interesting too because of some stuff I found on the interview database that made me go, "Oh, didn't realize that." So that'll be my tease for that.
Yeah,
Is going down that rabbit hole.
the sad thing is, as important as she was later in the books, she's very uninteresting. Is Simmer Edge?
Because we just don't get enough because she's a boogeyman.
Mm-hmm.
And then you meet her and you're like, the first time we're introduced to her, it's, oh wow, yeah, this is
Well,
scary.
we could probably do a combo episode on just sadism as the fourth on the tetrad. You know,
Yeah,
that probably would work. One that's actually more interesting to me is Asmodean because he is the deal with the devil. Devil went down to Georgia
mm, Faustian
character.
bargain. Yeah,
Yeah, the Faustian bargain. Yeah. Uh, Gabriel is pretty uninteresting.
oh, Ravine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Ravine. Yeah. Uh, Belal, we know almost nothing about. Maybe we need to do a deep dive on him just to get information on him because you
because yeah,
basically meet him and he dies.
yeah,
Yeah.
and apparently he was one of the more powerful ones. um anyway, uh I have lost my train of thought, so I don't know where else you
Okay,
wanted
so
to
we,
go
we
with
were
this.
talking he brought up Christianity and
Mhm.
that's the root of nihilism. Okay, and but what the point he was bringing across, I think, and I don't know if he did it well in that episode or not, or if it's my other base knowledge on Nietzschean work, was he called Christianity the cult of suffering. And to him, it was the downfall of it is the road. I think in the slide there, it was the road to nihilism because when you're in a cult of suffering and something happens that makes you doubt the conclusion, you're going to take a turn for the exact opposite of that. And that's what we saw with Grendel, right? She was in a cult of suffering. She was an ascetic. You deny yourself. You
Good
constantly
point.
deny yourself. You constantly work in a direction that is uncomfortable for you, but is good for everybody or all of humanity or all of these things,
Oh,
or the creator in this case, right? And so she was in the ultimate cult of suffering. And then this hole was bored in reality that said, and then everybody started behaving in the direction of this hole.
so
And yeah,
modern day analogy that because you know much like a lot of his work, people take Nietzsche's criticisms of Christianity um way too far. It's this God is dead. Okay, yeah, but then what did he say after that?
mhm,
Right? So he wasn't celebrating that idea. Just like he wasn't really celebrating um Christianity destroying itself. But again, that's where Rand Dostoevsky comes in, is because he was much more focused on that, and not just the ramifications of that, but the potential cures for that. And you just reminded me, because I have to see his stupid face on his stupid billboard every time I drive to your house and drive past his giant mega church, that
Joel Osteen.
for a very long time,
I was just
Christian.
guessing
Yep,
that there was an educated guess, but it was just guessing.
it's a very good guess that the the church in general, corporately, was very negative.
Hmm.
Um, and it's only natural that there would be a rebound effect.
Hmm.
And that's where you get he is the big one, but there are the sweater vested, Hawaiian shirt and khaki wearing cool dude preachers out there, just preaching happy niceness. And the extreme is the Joel Osteen's God wants you to be rich and have washboard abs. Yeah, no, that's not in the book, bro. Have you read it? um
Okay, so I'm going to give you a modern day example of this, and we're going to invoke our good buddy Charles Murray. Charles Murray's warning to the world was woke, self-flagellating ideology was going to create a rebound effect.
mm,
And someone posted on one of our videos, if you take James Lindsay seriously, you're an idiot. No, this is actually what Lindsay is warning about, is the rebound effect of the constant suffering cult that was wokeness. And we don't want to end up in that, because the rebound effect has 60% of the population in charge, right? And the rebound effect of Christianity that you're talking about is anti-Christianity. And we actually I think we're getting through the phase of that, the rebound effect of that. But on the flip side is there going to be another rebound?
mhm,
And that's what we got to worry about, because the lefties that handmade tell everything into existence might actually handmade tell everything into existence, because they're creating a rebound, right? And we don't want that. Nietzsche was warning against that with his God is dead, but don't go Dionysus. Apollo may be overly controlling, but don't go Dionysus. Don't go this way.
mhm.
And that's where Elon went wrong, is he was just like, it's going to happen no matter what. So let's just have everything end, because he thought he was being the good guy.
Mhm.
If you have a person that is a Forsaken that thought he was being the good guy, it was him, because he thought he was ending suffering, is what he thought. But in the same way as we as human beings can analogize, well, I put them out of their misery by killing them, when their misery was
Yes.
maybe being an alcoholic. You know, I could, help them get better, or I could just kill them. Both of them make them not an alcoholic.
Yeah. I was looking for the quote. Um, yeah, I can't see it, but basically, again, back to Denethor as an analogy is, when he's going to immolate himself and his own son, and it's uh, why? uh there's no point. Why are you all fleeing? Why are you fighting? Um so here uh this because of the corrupting knowledge, or the potentiality of corrupting knowledge, um which I think is part of what Nietzsche is warning about there. Um, when he talked about these things and the inevitability of nihilism. So this is from Return of the King, chapter 9. The seeing stones do not lie, and not even the Lord of Barad-dûr can make them do so. He can, maybe, by his will, choose what things shall be seen by weaker minds, or cause them to mistake the meaning of what they saw. Nonetheless, it cannot be doubted that when Denethor saw great forces arrayed against him in Mordor, and more still being gathered, he saw that which truly is. This this was this was then is without final hope. As Denethor perceived, victory cannot be achieved by arms.
That
So why
that
fight?
that yeah, no, but that is parallel to human perception in general, because we only input a certain amount of what is out there,
Mm,
and your belief system actually determines almost all of what you input. Almost all, because there's still a little chance something can get through. So if your belief system is nihilistic, then you see everything that supports that, right? If your belief system is a constant order and I can achieve, then all the inputs are going to support that. The problem is both of those can lead to folly. And we need an input system that says these support the things that will succeed, these support what can fail, and this is the best path forward based on that input. Humans are super bad at that. And I think that's what Nietzsche was getting at. That's why he loved Buddhism, because that is actually the underlying premise of Buddhism is, how do my inputs actually correspond to what my initial, this is one of the main purposes of your hippocampus. If you want to add modern technology to what these people were saying way back when, how does this align with what I think should happen and what is actually happening? Because there's some discord in there, and people tend to shift one way or the other, and that's what he was trying to get at. As far as the Palantir, you might be getting all the information. Portal stones, you might be getting all the information, but I think those were analogies to what actually happens in our perception. Because what happened with the portal stones with Rand and Matt and Ingtar and all of them, they got the worst outcome of everything.
mm,
If things were completely random and it was every universe you could go through,
I hadn't thought about
you
that.
would have got some positive things and you would have got some negative things. And you might have remembered the negative things more, but at the same time, you would have got a mix of both. Okay. What if Ishii hit that same button, right?
Thought just jumped into my head. Contrast that with we don't see it, we just get an impression and some vague mentions of it. But contrast that with what Moraine goes through when she goes through those rings in Rudine,
Mm-hmm.
and she does get a random sampling, if you will, and she's shocked and surprised by,
She does the
I
Doctor Strange that if I
yeah,
did this, I failed every time. Yeah.
I never would have imagined I would have done that, but apparently in some world, under some circumstances, I would do that. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the specific ones was attempting to control Rand by betting him, and that
Mm-hmm.
led to disaster. And but the
Oh,
point being, to your point about remembering the negative, is she didn't remember everything clearly, but it's, and the wise ones kind of said this, you're left with an impression
mm-hmm.
of the possibilities of the future.
Which is actually what dreams do, by the way, in real life. So there's something to that, because your mind puts together every event in your life and puts it in a way that is probabilities to different results.
All right,
Yeah.
well, let's wrap this up. And here's
Yeah.
another tease to as we dive into the Forsaken some more. I hadn't considered this until I was scrolling through the interview database, and it was something Jordan said kind of in passing about the seal and the boar and the Forsaken being trapped. But when Lanfear rants about even dreams being denied to her, the surface level thing there is what she's saying, which is, I am the master of dreams. How dare you deprive me of dreams? But Jordan said something in passing about the effects on sleeping without dreams. So the ones that were sealed deep enough that they were in a dreamless sleep, they just slept for 3,000 years and had no dreams. What
Mm.
does that do to the mind?
I could tell you what that does in the mind. So okay, yeah,
Exactly.
well, we'll go there. Yeah, it messes you up.
And so while we finish up with Ishamael here, what did that do to him that he was periodically pulled out and able to interact with the world? But then it's not said explicitly, but the implication is that when he goes back in, he goes back to sleep. So he has 1,000 years of sleep, dreamless sleep, and then he wakes up to awfulness and does awfulness. And then he goes back to sleep again for 1,000 years without dreaming. What does
Mhm.
that do to the mind? Well, we see what that does because there in the prologue, that man is different from who we see when we first see Balsamon. Very
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, especially when we think of the actual human mind in modern day neuroscience. The amount of data we have in there
Mm-hmm.
is so immense. The problem is the amount of data we have accessible is not as much. And when you have a dream that's super weird, there are things in your mind that you can't access when you're awake that are contributing to that. And so it's an amazing thing. This is why the debate of you're only using 10% of your mind or whatever, it comes in because we're using our entire brain the entire time. But the amount of information we have is not very much compared to what is actually stored in there. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a great conversation. So yeah, that's a good direction to go. Uh, but yeah, what do we got on social next time?
I have no idea. Oh,
Uh,
we were gonna talk Fauci.
yeah, we're gonna talk Fauci. Also, we need to address ISO's comment on Doge, which is a very valid comment, but I
Mm-hmm.
have an answer to. Uh, I have an answer that is hopeful too. But as far as how things actually play out, we will see with time because we're going through it right now. Nothing has ever happened like this. So
Mm-hmm.
this is something that might become a template or might become a warning. And his concern says it might be a warning, and I'm 100% in agreement with that. But there are some points in contention on that I would say there are things that indicate that it might not be the case. Because he was talking about he was comparing it to don't quote me on it because I don't have the comment in front of me, but the takeover of Stalin
Mm-hmm.
and which he would be extremely knowledgeable about. Also, piano sucks, by the way. My fingers do not do what they want to do, or I want them to do. So we're after this is going to be my next 45-minute session of learning piano. Uh,
And I'm sure your family is very glad that the keyboard you're using has headphones.
except that it was one of those big giant uh, connections. So I don't have a pair of headphones that
Oops.
actually fit in it. So I just have the volume down. But uh, yeah, anything else we want to discuss before?
No, we will see y'all next time.
All right, later.